across the endless fields of wheat, where the first rays of sunlight kissed the earth. A man was quietly fighting against fate itself. Caleb Morgan, a solitary farmer, was betting everything his family's generations-old farm and the future of his young daughter on one final harvest. He had no way of knowing that in just a single afternoon, an unexpected accident would consume all the hopes and dreams he had so carefully nurtured. And even more unimaginable, that the stranger he would rescue from the roaring flames that day would turn out to be a powerful billionaire, carrying the ability to change Caleb's life forever. One selfless act without expectation of reward. One quiet promise that carried unimaginable weight. And one miraculous rebirth born from the ashes of heartbreaking loss. Join us as we follow this extraordinary journey where the simple kindness of a farmer would plant seeds for greatness beyond his wildest dreams. And don't forget to comment where you're watching. From stories like these, connect us from every corner of the world. The sunrise bathed the Kansas sky in gold as Caleb Morgan stepped off his porch, his worn boots pressing into the dewy earth. Before him, the wheat fields stretched endlessly, a golden sea rippling under the gentle morning breeze, the stalks bowing their heavy heads like waves shimmering under the light. His calloused hands gripped the brim of his wide hat. He stood there silently, almost as if whispering to the land that had fed his family for 3 generations. This land, this field was all he had left. 3 years ago, a cruel illness had taken Caleb's beloved wife, leaving him alone with their little daughter, Emily. Their savings had vanished into treatments and hospital bills. All that remained was this farm, a fragile miracle Caleb fought to protect with every ounce of his strength and faith. This harvest was his last chance. If everything went right, if the weather held, if the wheat prices didn't crash, the profits would be just enough to pay off the looming bank debts and enough to send Emily to college, the dream her mother had whispered on her deathbed. To Caleb, every stalk of wheat out there wasn't just a plant. It was hope, a promise, a desperate prayer for a better future for the next generation. He walked slowly between the rows, his gaze solemn, examining every stem, every ear of grain. Kneeling down, he scooped a handful of soil, feeling its softness and moisture just as his father once taught him. If you want the land to give back, you have to listen to it. The breeze carried the scent of young wheat, mingled with the sharp tang of sweat. In the distance, a thin trail of smoke rose from the small wooden house Emily must be inside, preparing breakfast while reviewing notes for her final exams. Caleb smiled to himself, picturing the way Emily's eyes had shone when she received her college acceptance letter. She had jumped into his arms, whispering, "My Daddy, I'll make Mom proud." He had hugged her tightly, even as worry gnawed at his heart. How could he possibly afford tuition? How could he carry it all, just him and this one solitary harvest? But Caleb refused to despair. Just like every harvest before this one, he would give it his all. He believed if he sowed with all his love and patience, Mother Earth would not betray him. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind swept across the field, snatching Caleb's hat from his hands. Laughing, he chased after it as it tumbled through the golden waves of wheat. In that brief moment, the laughter, the sunlight, the whispering fields, the world felt achingly beautiful and peaceful. But Caleb didn't know. In just a few hours, that fragile peace would be torn apart by a devastating disaster. A disaster that would burn his entire field of dreams to ashes and ignite a strange, miraculous journey beyond anything he had ever dared imagine. The sun climbed higher, scorching the endless wheat fields with its burning light. Caleb crouched beneath the thin shade of the water pump, carefully inspecting each section of the irrigation pipe. He frowned. Some sections were beginning to crack. He quickly calculated the cost of repairs in his head and sighed. There was no room for extra expenses now. He had to keep everything running until harvest. As he buried himself deeper into work, a strange noise suddenly tore through the stillness, the shrill screech of tires. Then, immediately, a violent crash, echoing from the dirt road that bordered the field. Caleb sprang up, heart pounding wildly. He bolted out from under the shade, racing through the tall rows of wheat, his heavy boots crushing the soft stalks beneath him. When he reached the edge of the field, he froze in shock. A silver sports car, something utterly foreign to this rural land, had crashed headfirst into the wheat. Smoke billowed from the crumpled hood. The acrid stench of burnt metal and oil clawed at his nostrils. Without hesitation, Caleb ran toward the wreck. He yanked at the car door, but it was jammed tight. Inside, he spotted a man slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling from his temple. Caleb shouted, grabbing a bent piece of metal and straining to wrench the door open. Every muscle in his arms bulged with the effort. Finally, with a sharp crack, the door gave way. Suddenly, a small fire ignited under the car's chassis. Caleb didn't waste a second. He reached through the broken frame, hoisted the man up, and dragged him out. The man was dead weight, limp as a rag doll, carrying the stranger over his shoulders. Caleb staggered away from the burning car. Just as they reached the open dirt clearing, a deafening explosion ripped through the air. A towering inferno roared behind them. Caleb fell to the ground, shielding the unconscious man with his own body. The earth itself seemed to shake beneath the force of the blast. It was a long moment before Caleb dared to rise again. When he turned back, his heart shattered. Half the wheat field his hopes. His dreams was now a raging sea of fire. The golden stalks, once dancing under the morning sun, were reduced to blackened ruins and smoldering ash. Caleb clenched his fists so tightly that blood seeped from his cracked knuckles. Everything he had poured his soul into, every drop of sweat shed over countless days, was being devoured before his very eyes. Every lick of flame devoured not just the crops, but Emily's future as well. He shut his eyes, drawing in a long, trembling breath. Now was not the time to collapse. Caleb lifted the injured man once again and carried him toward the small wooden house. The stranger's forehead was still bleeding, his face bruised and battered. Despite the agony tearing at his own heart, Caleb gently laid the man down on the old couch in the living room. He cleaned the wounds with a rough cotton cloth and bandaged them with supplies from an ancient first aid kit in the kitchen. His eyes, usually so full of life, were now still and heavy like a lake with no ripples. No anger, no blame, only exhaustion, etched deeply into his sun-worn face. Outside, thick black smoke twisted into the brilliant blue sky. The acrid scent of ash clung to every breath. A while later, the front door creaked open. Emily stood there, her school dress whipping wildly in the hot breeze. Her eyes widened in horror at the sight of the devastated fields. "Daddy!" she choked out, her voice cracking. Caleb gently squeezed her shoulder and whispered, "Saul Bure, it's okay, sweetheart. We still have each other." He believed it. Even if the earth turned to ashes, Even if dreams were consumed by flame, he and Emily still had their family, still had love, and still had the two hands that would never give up. What Caleb didn't know was that the man lying unconscious on that old wooden couch would not only change the fate of their family, but bring a gift so immense, so unimaginable, it would alter the course of their lives forever. The afternoon dragged slowly across the Nebraska countryside. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the window, casting faint, blurred patterns across the worn wooden floor. Caleb sat motionless by the fireplace, his calloused hands entwined tightly together. He had cleaned the blood from the man, bandaged the wounds, and even changed him into one of his old shirts. Now, all he could do was wait. Outside, smoke still rose, casting a ghostly shroud over the scorched remnants of the wheat fields, like a funeral veil. The entire house seemed suspended in a thick, heavy silence of loss. Suddenly, a faint groan broke the stillness. Caleb jumped to his feet and hurried over to the couch. The stranger, pale, disheveled, slowly opened his eyes. They were clouded with pain and confusion. Where am I?" the man croaked, his voice raw and broken. Caleb poured a glass of water and handed it to him. "My house," Caleb replied simply. "You had an accident. Your car crashed into my field and caught fire." The stranger furrowed his brow, struggling to piece things together. His trembling hands clutched the glass. As his gaze wandered across the weathered wooden walls, the threadbare sofa, the humble family photos, something shifted in his eyes. The panic faded, replaced by deep confusion and a flicker of shame. "I ruined your crops," the man whispered, his voice dropping. Caleb only nodded, the sorrow in his eyes quiet but unmistakable. "But you still saved me," the man muttered, as if unable to comprehend it. Caleb sank into the chair across from him with a weary sigh. A man's life matters more. Crops can be replanted. People can't. The room fell into a heavy silence again. Outside, the wind sighed through the burned fields, carrying with it a mournful whisper. The man pushed himself upright, wincing from the pain but otherwise intact. "What's your name?" he asked. "Caleb Turner," Caleb answered, hesitating for just a moment. "And yours?" A shadow of hesitation crossed the stranger's battered face. Then, after a heavy breath, he replied, as if laying down a burden, "My name is Ethan Cole." Caleb frowned. The name sounded faintly familiar, but he didn't dwell on it. Out here, reputations meant little. Out here, people lived by sweat and soil. Emily tiptoed into the room, carrying a bowl of hot porridge. Her curious and cautious gaze lingered on the stranger. "I made this for him," she murmured. Ethan looked at the little girl, and something softened in his battered eyes. He accepted the bowl with both hands, nodding warmly. Thank you, sweetheart." And so, the three of them sat there, a poor farmer, a stranger, and a little girl sharing silence, sharing loss, and nurturing the first fragile shoots of something else. Trust. As dusk deepened into night, Caleb stood and stepped out onto the porch. He gazed at the blackened fields, the skeletal remains stretching all the way to the horizon. He knew he couldn't hide from the truth much longer. The harvest was gone. The bank loans loomed closer. The dream of sending Emily to college might already be lost. A gentle hand landed on his shoulder. Caleb turned to find Ethan standing behind him, his expression solemn. "I owe you more than my life," Ethan said slowly, "and I won't forget." Caleb gave a faint, tired smile. "No one owes anyone. We just do what's right." But deep inside, something had shifted. And that night, as Caleb closed the heavy wooden door behind him, he had no idea that the fate of his family had already begun to change, in ways even he could never have imagined. Night fell, casting a thick, heavy darkness over the Turner home. The chorus of insects buzzing outside only made the stifling silence in the small kitchen feel even heavier. Ethan sat at the old wooden table, his fingers tapping lightly on the surface. Caleb stood at the sink, washing the empty bowl of porridge, his gaze distant as if weighing something far heavier than just the dishes. Emily was asleep, curled up under a thin blanket in the next room, her steady breathing a quiet reminder of all Caleb had to protect. "I don't know how to even begin to say this." Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice low and rough. Caleb wiped his hands on his apron but didn't turn around. "No need to say anything. Tomorrow morning, you'll see the road. I'll show you the way back to the highway." "I'm not planning on leaving," Ethan cut in. The words made Caleb freeze. "I owe you and your daughter a debt far greater than money could repay." Slowly, Caleb turned around. His gaze was hardened, the gaze of a man who had heard too many empty promises in his life. "I didn't save you expecting anything in return," Caleb said flatly. "I know," Ethan nodded. "And that's exactly why I'm not offering something you can easily refuse." From his coat pocket, Ethan pulled out a small sheaf of papers and set them on the table. Caleb stepped forward and looked down. A business card and a printed letterhead titled Cole Ventures Capital Group. "Your—" Caleb frowned, reading the name carefully. Suddenly, fragments of memories rushed back. News reports he had glimpsed while waiting at gas stations. Articles he had skimmed in worn magazines. Ethan Cole, one of the wealthiest businessmen in America. The man who had built an investment empire from scratch. Caleb took a half step back, stunned. "You're a billionaire," he whispered. Ethan gave a slight nod. "But don't call me that," he said, with genuine humility. Today, I'm just a man who owes you his life." A heavy silence swallowed the room again. Caleb clenched his fists. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel: anger, hurt, hope. All he knew was this man could change his and Emily's future with a single nod. Ethan pushed the document toward Caleb. "I want to buy the entire field." Caleb flinched, eyes widening. "Not to take the land," Ethan said quickly, seeing the guarded look on Caleb's face. "I want to rebuild it, invest in it, replant this field stronger, better, more sustainable." He paused, then added, "And I want you to stay, to run it." As the rightful owner, Caleb stared at Ethan as if he had just spoken madness. "You want to invest in this wreck," Caleb said bitterly. Ethan's expression stayed firm. "I see what you've built here. Perseverance. Faith. That's worth more than anything money could buy." Caleb's hand tightened on the edge of the table. Was this the dream Miriam, his late wife, had whispered to him on sleepless nights? That one day, someone would see the value they had bled and sweated to preserve. He glanced toward Emily's room, where his daughter slept soundly. Every lost harvest was another year of dreams postponed. Every stalk of wheat turned to ash was another fragile hope slipping away. "I'm not taking anything you're not ready to give," Ethan said gently. almost reading Caleb's mind. "The choice is yours." Caleb stood frozen. His heart battled between doubt and hope. "And if I say no?" he asked quietly. Ethan gave a sad, understanding smile. "Then tomorrow morning I'll be gone, and you'll never hear from me again." It was such a simple answer, without pressure, without strings, and yet it left Caleb feeling more choked up than he could explain. He didn't know that outside, on the far horizon, a sliver of dawn was beginning to rise. A dawn that would mark a turning point from which neither he nor Emily would ever return to the life they once knew. Caleb sat there long after Ethan had left the kitchen, leaving him alone to wrestle with himself. Outside, the silver moonlight bathed the scorched wheat fields, where only blackened roots remained, scars carved deep into the earth. Every gust of wind carried the heavy scent of ash and regret. On the table, the investment contract still lay where it had been placed, a silent challenge. Caleb buried his head in his hands. His mind spun with numbers, lost harvests, sleepless nights spent calculating until his hair turned gray. And above all, the image of Emily, the girl with dreaming eyes, who believed in him, even when the whole world seemed to turn its back. He thought of Miriam, of the nights they sat on this very porch, dreaming of futures they never got to see. She had always believed that kindness would be rewarded if only one had enough patience, enough faith. But Caleb knew life didn't work like that. He had learned the hard way that sometimes kindness alone wasn't enough to save a dream. He rose to his feet and stepped outside. In front of him, he saw Ethan sitting quietly on the porch steps, cradling a cup of cold coffee. Caleb slowly sat down beside him. "Are you sure about what you said?" Caleb asked, his voice rough and dry. Ethan didn't look at him. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on the far horizon, where stars glimmered faintly against the deep night sky. "More sure than anything I've ever been in my life," Ethan replied. Caleb gave a dry, almost bitter laugh. "What about your gain? What do you get from helping a broke farmer with nothing left but scorched earth?" Ethan turned to him, meeting his eyes steadily. "I get to invest in something money can't buy: perseverance, selfless kindness. And I want to believe in that." Silence enveloped them once more, but this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was almost peaceful. Caleb closed his eyes. He thought about the freezing winters, when he and Emily huddled by the failing wood stove for warmth. He thought about the dry seasons, where every drop of irrigation water had to be measured like gold. And he thought of a future where Emily could walk through the gates of a university on her own feet, without carrying the crushing weight of debt on her shoulders. Finally, he opened his eyes and let out a long, deep sigh, as if shedding the heavy burden of all those hard years. "All right," Caleb said quietly, almost a whisper carried away by the breeze. "We'll do it your way." Ethan didn't say a word. He simply placed a steady, reassuring hand on Caleb's shoulder, a small gesture, but one that carried more weight than 1,000 promises. In the darkness, the two men sat side by side, saying nothing, yet knowing that from this moment on, everything would change. It was no longer a lonely fight between a father and his stubborn land. They had become allies fighting to reclaim hope, to stand against injustice, and to rebuild what had been lost. Inside, Emily stirred in her sleep, a faint smile curling on her lips, as if, even in her dreams, she could sense that a new chapter was about to begin. And above them, the Kansas sky seemed to shine brighter than ever. A promise had been carved into the night, forged from honesty, from loss, and from a rare belief that in a harsh world, good things might still have a place to grow. The next morning, Caleb Carter woke to an unfamiliar sound out front. He threw on his worn jacket and stepped out onto the porch, squinting against the sudden blaze of sunlight. Before him was a sight he would never forget for the rest of his life. 3 large trucks lined the dusty road, their beds packed full of brand-new farming equipment, automated seeders, state-of-the-art drip irrigation systems, and a gleaming wheat combine that shimmered in the sunlight like a block of moving gold. Ethan Monroe stood there, baseball cap pulled low, clipboard in hand, a mischievous grin on his face. "We've got work to do, Caleb," he said, as if everything unfolding was the most natural thing in the world. Caleb stood frozen, his throat tight. He didn't even bother asking how Ethan had managed to procure everything so quickly, nor dared question the massive cost behind it. Because deep down, he understood. When someone truly intends to change your life, they won't burden you with doubt. Emily came running up behind him, her eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, is this for us?" she whispered, voice trembling. Caleb knelt down and pulled his daughter into a tight embrace. "For us," he murmured. The workers Ethan had hired wasted no time. They measured the salvageable plots of land, dismantled the broken irrigation lines, and installed new water tanks made from fire-resistant materials. Caleb and Emily rolled up their sleeves and joined in. Mud stained their pant legs. Sweat poured from their brows, but Caleb had never felt more alive. Every swing of a hoe, every seed planted into the soil, was an unspoken declaration. We will not fall. We will rise again from the ashes. 3 days later, the sleekest, neat rows of young wheat shoots began painting a new portrait of hope across the once charred field. Each evening, Caleb would take Emily down the new rows, teaching her how to check soil moisture, how to spot the first signs of pests. Simple lessons, but packed with love and a legacy he hoped to pass on. Ethan always watched from a distance sometimes, nodding approvingly, sometimes jotting quiet notes into his worn leather notebook. But on the 4th night, after the workers had packed up and gone, Ethan invited Caleb and Emily to gather around the family's old kitchen table. He pulled out a neatly clipped packet of papers inside a leather folder. "Caleb, this is the official agreement," he said slowly. "I'm not just helping you rebuild this farm. I want to invest for the long term a support fund for local farmers, starting with you." Caleb stared at him, his hands trembling slightly. "You, trust us that much?" Ethan gave a soft chuckle, his gaze filled with a sincerity words could never fully capture. "You saved me from that fire. But more importantly, you saved me from losing faith that kindness still exists in this world." Caleb didn't respond immediately. He glanced at Emily, who was listening intently, gripping the hem of her shirt. He knew that if he refused, they would continue to fight, but it would be a lonely and grueling battle. If he accepted, they would finally have a real chance not just to survive, but to rebuild their dreams. He took a deep breath, as if gathering up all the grief and hardship of the past years. Then he reached out and signed his name in the bottom right-hand corner of the contract. In that moment, Caleb Carter knew. A new chapter of their lives had truly begun, not through some miracle, but through the trust born between strangers, in the ashes and the dreams of rebirth. 1 week later, on the very first day of the new planting season, Ethan Monroe returned to Caleb Carter's farm, this time not with trucks or machinery, but with a thick navy blue envelope clutched firmly in his hand. Caleb was inspecting the newly installed irrigation system along the field's edge when he saw Ethan approaching. "Good morning," Ethan greeted, his expression more serious than usual. Caleb nodded, wiping his dusty hands on his worn jeans before shaking Ethan's hand. "What's going on, Mr. Monroe?" Caleb asked, a hint of worry in his voice. Ethan held out the envelope. "Inside is a full scholarship for Emily," he said, locking eyes with Caleb. "Tuition, living expenses, books. Everything covered until she graduates college." Caleb froze. He stared at the envelope as if it were an artifact from another world. "A scholarship," he stammered. Ethan nodded. "Yes. I contacted the university Emily dreams of attending Stanford and pledged full sponsorship. No conditions. No strings attached. It's just gratitude." Caleb clutched the envelope tighter, his eyes welling up with tears. He swallowed hard, emotion rising thick in his throat. "You know," he rasped, voice cracking, I once thought it would take me a lifetime to give Emily a different future. And now, in just one moment, everything has changed." Ethan placed a hand firmly on Caleb's shoulder, his voice low and warm. "Caleb, it wasn't me who changed everything. It was you. You saved my life without hesitation, without expectation. You reminded me that in a world full of transactions, there are still people who live by faith and heart. Today, I'm simply repaying that debt in the only way it deserves." A small voice rang out from the house. "Daddy." Emily came running, her dress catching dust from the field, a letter clutched tightly in her hand. "I got into Stanford. Daddy. They said I have a scholarship, too. How is this possible?" Caleb dropped to his knees and pulled her into a fierce embrace. In that moment, every hardship, every sleepless night, every tear-soaked prayer evaporated into nothingness. "I promised you. Remember?" he whispered, voice trembling. "No matter what, I would find a way to help you soar." Emily sobbed into her father's shoulder. Ethan stood silently, watching the two of them, a lump rising in his own throat. He knew then, he hadn't just helped rebuild a farm, he had helped rewrite the destiny of a family. As Caleb and Emily stood up, Ethan extended his hand again. "But I have one more proposal," he said, his eyes glinting with a familiar spark. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I want you to join my new project," Ethan continued. "I'm launching a support fund for small farmers across America, the ones like you, the ones who fought alone for too long." Caleb's eyes widened. I'm just a farmer. I don't know anything about managing funds." Ethan laughed. "That's exactly why I need you. Not for your suits and spreadsheets, but for your heart, your grit, and your unbreakable spirit." Caleb stood still, looking out across the vibrant green wheat fields stretching toward the horizon. In that moment, he understood. The new path wasn't just for Emily. It was opening for him, too, a road he had never dared dream about. He clasped Ethan's hand firmly. "You've got me," Caleb said, his voice as steady and deep as a plow breaking fresh earth. "We'll sow hope again, one field at a time, one family at a time." Ethan laughed heartily. "Then let's start right here. Caleb Carter." There they stood on land once swallowed by ash, now brimming with new life. A billionaire and a farmer, two men from opposite worlds, now teammates in the greatest harvest of their lives. A harvest of hope? That autumn, Caleb Carter's fields shimmered with a golden brilliance unlike anything the town had ever seen. Under the afternoon sun, waves of wheat swayed and whispered like a timeless fairy tale. The entire small town had heard the miraculous story of Caleb, the farmer who saved a stranger from a blazing inferno, and the unimaginable gift that followed: a reborn field, a future rekindled for an entire family. But for Caleb, the greatest miracle wasn't the shiny new machines, or the unexpected wealth pouring in like a sudden rainstorm. The real miracle was waking up each morning, stepping out onto the porch, breathing in the rich scent of the earth, and seeing Emily sitting on the front steps, books scattered around her, her eyes glowing like twin stars. My little girl's getting ready for Stanford, Caleb thought, his heart swelling with a pride words could never contain. And Ethan Monroe, he didn't vanish like a passing breeze. Instead, he appeared more often no longer as a billionaire, but as a friend, a true companion. Together, they built the New Seed Fund, supporting hundreds of small farming families from coast to coast. Every field revived, every harvest won, carried within it a piece of the story that had begun in this humble wheat field. One crisp evening near the year's end, Caleb stood among the golden rows, the cold wind carrying the sweet scent of ripened wheat. He was inspecting the last few lines before harvest when he spotted a truck pulling up at the roadside. Ethan climbed out, holding a small, carefully wrapped package in his hands. "Here," he said, handing it to Caleb. "A little gift to celebrate your first harvest." Caleb unwrapped it, a simple wooden frame engraved with the words, "From a small seed, great hope grows." Beneath the inscription was a photo of two men, one in dusty overalls, one in a plain white shirt standing shoulder to shoulder amid endless fields, eyes set firmly on the horizon. Caleb laughed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You really know how to pick a gift, Ethan," he said, his eyes shining with pure, unfiltered joy. "Wasn't me who picked it." Ethan chuckled. "Emily's idea." They laughed together, the sound carrying on the cool breeze. The laughter of men who had weathered loss, tasted defeat, and risen again. Stronger, kinder. The sunset stretched across the sky, bathing the fields in molten gold. Caleb gazed out over the land, whispering softly, Mother Earth, I have not failed you." Ethan clasped his hands behind his back, voice low and steady. "You didn't just save a life, Caleb," he said. "You saved my faith in human goodness, in a world growing more cynical by the day." Caleb said nothing, letting the words sink deep into his bones, into the very soil beneath his feet. In the distance, Emily came running from the porch, clutching a stack of papers, acceptance letters, the dreams she had worked so hard to bring to life. "Dad, she called," breathless with excitement. "I just got accepted as a research assistant in the biomedical lab at school." Caleb and Ethan watched her, their eyes warm with pride, the pride of two fathers who had somehow, against all odds, won a battle that few even saw coming. "She's going to change the world," Ethan said firmly. "No," Caleb smiled, shaking his head. "She's going to save it in her own way." And in that moment, under a sky ablaze with the colors of dusk, among fields singing in the breeze, both men knew that every scar, every loss, every sacrifice had been worth it, because from one small seed, hope had blossomed into a harvest without end. If this story touched your heart, Please hit like and subscribe to join us for even more powerful journeys like this one. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could change your life. Because sometimes, the world's greatest changes start with just one small act of kindness.